This video is sponsored by Displate.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
I don't want this anymore.
The House is the latest in the weird and wonderful world of stop-motion films, being released just last month and produced by Nexus Studios, a British company based in London. Despite me watching similar stop-motion pieces on Netflix in the past, it never appeared on my recommended list, and it was only from the influx of requests that I got to review this that I even knew it existed. So do keep the requests coming in, guys. And normally when I receive a large amount of requests for a specific film, it's probably because it's got some dark, messed up moments in it. The film is labelled as a dark comedy, and though the comedy element is a little bit on the lighter side, the dark elements are certainly not lacking, both with its unsettling imagery we see on screen, but also with some of the thought-provoking commentaries that lie beneath the surface. This is actually more of a unique entry to review, as though the product is presented to us as a singular hour-and-a-half film, it's rather more 3 separate 30-minute shorts that are just played back to back, with each of these short films containing different characters and spanning over different periods of time, with the only seemingly connection between them being that it all takes place in the same strange house. Though all the shorts are written by Ender Walsh, they do all feature different directors, which offers us varying art styles and tones. So for this review, rather than look at the film as a whole, I'm instead going to review each short separately, and then at the end we'll see how all three work together as a single product. Not only judging them on the stories themselves, but also looking at the underlying message they are trying to convey, ranging from the stigma against mental health, to the dangers of materialism that can lead to one's demise. Speaking of materialism, time to thank this video's sponsor, Displate. Displate is the leading marketplace for the highest quality metal posters. That's right, metal, which features a huge range of products and designs from talented artists from all over the world. But why metal, I hear you ask? Well, not only does it mean you won't be getting any of those accidental tears, nope, can't rip it, but also means you can simply hang them up with the use of magnets. Simply apply the magnetic pads to the wall, apply the poster, and voila, metal. There are just so many awesome designs to choose from, with a huge selection of brands and a wide range in art styles, including a bunch of designs that I personally recommend, which you can check out in the link below. Not to mention that if you click through the link, you'll also get a discount on your purchase. So thank you to Displate for sponsoring this video. Now back to the review. For the opening, we're presented with these black and white animated segments, giving us an early indication to the surrealness we're about to experience. The first short is titled, "And Heard Within, a Lie is Spun," and is probably my favourite short of the three. It takes place in the past and revolves around a young girl named Mabel, who lives with her father Raymond, her mother Penny, and newborn sister Isabel. Immediately you're gonna notice the uncanny art style, most notable with all the characters possessing very small faces, like those photo edits you see where people have had their faces shrunk down. Ugh. The faces also offer no real distinct features from one another. In typical animation, you have the younger characters that will feature larger facial features in proportion to the head to offer more of a cutesy look. Here, however, all characters regardless of their age all appear to have the same facial structure. The faces also offer very little expression and movement, which gives our characters a really unsettling look. One day the family are visited by Raymond's relatives, who come to see the newly born Isabel. The visitors immediately begin to snub the family for their lack of wealth and mock Raymond for still being poor, despite him having an education.
With your education and opportunities, it shocks me that you still haven't managed to lift yourself out of this squalor.
This bitch!
This naturally frustrates Raymond, and later that evening he ends up getting drunk and going on a walk. Whilst taking a wee against a tree, he is confronted by a mysterious figure in a carriage who invites him in. Raymond returns home later that night and begins wolfing down his dinner, mumbling that something amazing has happened and that everything will now change for the better. The next morning, the family are visited by a gentleman named Mr. Thomas, who works for an architect named Mr. Van Schoonbeek, who it turns out was the mysterious figure Raymond encountered the previous night. He proposed to Raymond that he would build the family a wealthy new home, completely free of charge, on the sole condition that the family gives up their current house to Van Schoonbeek. The family agree and move in the very next day, which is where things begin to get weird. Upon wandering the house, Mabel will occasionally see construction workers, but when she tries speaking to them, they simply stare back at her in a creepy manner, without saying a single word.
Morning. We've just moved in. Someone say something.
There are lavishes of food being produced for the family, but with no sign as to who may have cooked or prepared it.
Our servants, I suppose. Oh.
New rooms are constantly being constructed, and old features such as the stairs are being removed.
What happened to the stairs? My parents took them down because I am grounded.
Mabel's parents also appear to be acting increasingly strange, with her mother constantly producing fabric from a sewing machine to the point of exhaustion, and her father looking out the window and laughing menacingly at the sight of their old house being torn down.
What are they doing?
Well, I suppose they need the material.
Later on, the parents would even start wearing strange new outfits, almost making them look like pieces of furniture. Foreshadowing. Mabel and Isabel explore more of the house and manage to stumble into the basement where they find their old house is still preserved.
Isabel!
Later, when Mabel returns to the living room, she finds her old dollhouse is being burnt on the fire and discovers that her parents have been turned into furniture.
My little girl.
That's disturbing.
The fire begins to get out of control, but thanks to their mother, Mabel and Isabel manage to escape and watch the house burn in the distance, where the short ends. Yeah, this short is definitely my favourite of the three, not only offering some really horror-like moments with disturbing imagery, but also giving us that sense of mystery, letting the story build at a steady pace and allowing the tension to gradually build as more and more strange occurrences go on, not to mention giving a satisfying payoff in the end. My personal take on this short was that it was representing the lust for materialism and wealth, and how that can end up destroying you, and how the rich uses this desire to prey on the poor. As when the family starts off in their original house, we see they aren't particularly wealthy, but they are still self-sufficient, having food, warmth, and each other. It's not until Raymond's relatives come to visit and start belittling his lifestyle that he begins to resent it, and now desires more. This is subtly shown to us by how Raymond later gobbles down his dinner in an aggressive manner, showing his greed. I also noticed on second viewing the increasing use of green used in the colour palette as the story progresses, with dark green often being associated with ambition, greed, and jealousy. We even later see Raymond snubbing his old lifestyle as we watch him laugh as their old family home is torn down, whilst Mabel looks on with sadness. We see the mother's pursuit to constantly produce material which not only leads to her exhaustion, but also the neglect of her children. Perhaps this is to reflect the hard work she must slave herself to in order to help maintain their new lifestyle. I also think the fire is symbolic of the family's consumerism, starting off small and humble at the start of the short, but then failing to light in the new house as Raymond becomes obsessed with it, only being able to reignite it once again by sacrificing his old possessions, aka having to sell them to make money, old possessions that he once had sentimental attachment to.
Oh, but I have pieces here that have been in my family for generations. That's my old chair.
I'm not sure I actually need it anymore, to be honest. We have so many beautiful chairs now.
Eventually, the burning desire gets out of control, consuming the family and leading to their demise. I also believe that the parents turning into furniture is meant to be a visual to represent how they fully attach their sense of self to materials, now becoming fully consumed by them. Also, all of this is gleefully looked over by the architect Van Schoonbeek, who looks down and laughs upon the family's suffering. I believe Schoonbeek is representing the elite taking advantage of the poor, as he gets them to give up their old home, which he has now destroyed to repurpose the land for himself, and by having the family in his new property, he can now profit from their existence. Because even though it's stated that he offers them the house for free, I believe that the mother slaving away to produce material is a metaphor for her now having to work in order to pay rent and bills, as the materials she produces are for the house, and Mr. Thomas congratulates her, stating that the architect would be pleased with her progress.
Madam, Mr. Van Schoonbeek is very pleased with your fine work.
And Schoonbeek's control over the family is shown to us as the house is constantly being altered by him without the family's consent, such as new rooms being built and the stairs being removed, with Mr. Thomas potentially representing an estate agent, being told to lie to the tenants as he plays the middleman, which eventually causes him to break down as he suffers from guilt.
I'm just an actor. It gives me a script. I have to say things to you and do things.
On a final note, I just want to mention the significance of the doll's house. At the beginning of the short, we see Mabel playing with a couple in the dollhouse, perhaps a metaphor for how Schoonbeek will be manipulating her parents. And of course, the dollhouse being thrown onto the fire, which foreshadows the fate of the actual house. Overall, I really like this first short. Sadly, however, the same can't be quite said about the next one. The second short is titled Then Lost Is Truth That Can't Be Won, which now not only takes place in the present day, but more noticeable is that our main character is now a giant anthropomorphic rat. I say that this is set in present day, but it would be more accurate to say that it's set around 2009, as we hear on a news report in the background talking about the financial recession which occurred around that time, and our main character using a Bluetooth headset, which was all the rave back then. Our main character has no name in this short and is even just referred to as the developer in the credits. He's trying to refurbish the house in order to have it sold off to a wealthy buyer. At first I thought this was the refurbishment from the house burning down in the previous short, and though this house does have the same appearance as the one we saw earlier on, I don't believe they are the exact same house, as the original was set on top of a hill, and this one appears to be in a flat area. Despite the property looking modern and highly polished on surface level, our developer discovers that it seems to be suffering from an infestation of fur beetles, which despite his best efforts to exterminate, continue to grow in numbers. The developer, however, due to his financial situation, needs to have the house sold as soon as possible, so does his best to simply mask up the problem and proceeds with a property viewing the next day. Despite our developer's best efforts, the majority of clients seem uninterested in the property, flat out ignoring his pitches, and just seem to be creating more of a mess than anything else. The developer tries to wow them with a new smartphone voice command system, but the system malfunctions, which scares off the remaining guests. All that is, except these two, an odd-shaped couple who seem to show great interest in the property.
Can we ask you some specific questions?
The couple end up staying in the property well past the allotted viewing time, and even decide to sleep in the house on the same night. The developer is a little weirded out by this, but in desperation for a sale, obliges to their request. Over the next few days, the strange couple become increasingly settled into the home, almost as if they are actually living there. The developer begins to suspect they are trying to con him for some rent-free accommodation, and so rings the police to have them thrown out. The police immediately turn up at the door, only it's for a different reason.
We've heard from Dr. Jaffrey that you've been telephoning him at all times of the day, sir.
Yeah?
So to give some context, throughout the short we've heard our developer talking to an unknown individual on the other end of the phone. We assume that with the use of words such as darling, that this is his partner.
Hi darling, it's me. It's the biggest day of my life today. If you could be thinking of me, you know, maybe say a little prayer, I'd really appreciate it.
However, when the police show up to his house, it's revealed that the person on the phone was actually his dentist, and the dentist had filed a complaint to the police for harassment. Worse still is that the police completely ignore the developer's pleas to deal with the odd couple staying in his home. Once the police leave, a whole bunch of other visitors turn up on the door, claiming to be relatives of the strange couple, who now declare the house as theirs. The developer, now at his wits' ends, decides to take matters into his own hands and reaches for the poison that he earlier used on the fur beetles, only he accidentally ends up inhaling the fumes himself and wakes up in a hospital. The strange couple end up collecting him and bring him back to the house, where the family throws him a welcome home party, with them all now sporting extra limbs and clapping in a weird synced up cult-like manner. We then cut forward to where we now see the family destroying the house, looking much more like insects rather than rodents. We then see our developer amongst them, who is now reverted to a more animal-like state, where he runs into a hole in the wall, and the short ends. Okay, so I found this one a little more difficult to dissect, to the point that I completely changed my outlook on it after the second viewing. But first I want to talk about the story itself. I do feel as though this short is a downgrade from the first one. The first one did such a great job of handling the pacing, setting the atmosphere and building the tension, whereas this one kind of puts its foot on the brakes. It still has that uncanny feel to it, but doesn't really offer that sense of mystery or intrigue until the strange couple show up at the halfway mark. As for the meaning behind this short, well, on my first viewing I leant towards the idea that it was once again a story of the rich folk shitting on the poor working class developer, but as the short went on, that theory began to make less and less sense, especially with the weird instance on the developer harassing the dentist, which made me think, is the developer actually insane? So upon second viewing I looked at this with a different perspective, and I believe this short is actually a representation of mental health in general, with our developer character suffering from it. But on top of that, I believe the situation of the house itself is meant to play parallel to the situation going on in our developer's mind. Hear me out. In the same way the house has this underlying issue within its core, so too does our developer. He tries to ignore the issue and makes the house appear polished on the surface, similar to how he attempts to make himself look polished for the visitors. But the cracks begin to shine through, and the problems worsen. I also think the poison he uses on the fur beetles is meant to represent him coping with his mental health issues through the use of drugs. That's why we get this trippy dance sequence with the bugs partway through, and a sort of LSD feel whilst the lights are malfunctioning. Eventually the developer overdoses on the drugs, and that's what ends him up in hospital. The police showing up to his house and ignoring his pleas to help him with the strange couple is a reflection on how the law doesn't care for the issue of mental health, just so long as it doesn't cause a disturbance to the peace. This actually touches upon a personal experience of mine where I used to work for a local council. I once received a call from a member of the public who was complaining of a neighbour who lived in a rundown property, and this neighbour was frequently in the garden, screaming abuse at people. This was clearly someone who was suffering from mental health issues, but when the police were called, they refused to class it as a mental health issue and instead blamed the behaviour solely on the individual taking drugs. Which, yeah, I agree the drugs were a part of the issue, but more so of a symptom to the major issues and not the cause. The same goes for our developer, where his issues are ignored and eventually the mental illness manifests and grows inside of him, to the point that it completely takes over, where by the end of it our developer is seen as less of a person and more of an animal. Or the whole short could just be an anti-immigration message. Who knows? Our third and final short is titled Listen Again and Seek the Sun. It takes place in what I assume to be a dystopian future where much of the surrounding land has been flooded, and all that is left standing is the house. The house is now sectioned into numerous apartments, with our main character Rosa as the landlady, who, yes, our main character is now a cat. Again, no explanation given as to why. Due to the lack of tenants in the house, Rosa is struggling for income, so is desperately trying to restore the house to encourage more people to move in. Sadly, however, things aren't going too successful for her. Rosa still does have 2 tenants in the property, a male cat named Elias, who is a fisherman, and a female cat named Jen, who is a spiritualist. Despite both living in the house, neither of the 2 pay rent. At least not in the traditional sense, with Elias offering fish and Jen offering spiritual rocks.
This is not a rock, this is a mineral for like the 10th time.
This causes frustration to Rosa, as she would like the money so that she could renovate the property. During a sit down, Jen informs Rosa of her spirit partner Cosmos, who soon arrives at the property where he pitches a tent outside, much to Rosa's annoyance. Cosmos claims that he's a craftsman and agrees to help repair a loose floorboard in the hallway. The next morning, Rosa is awoken to the sound of banging, only to find that Cosmos has ripped up the floorboards in order to build a boat for Elias. Rosa is understandably angered by this and ends up yelling at both Cosmos and Elias. The following morning, Elias leaves the property, much to Rosa's surprise. She then discovers that Cosmos has built a giant lever on the front of her property, where he says Rosa can push it whenever she feels she wants to leave the property herself, which only ends up infuriating her further.
You're destroying everything.
After storming inside, she goes to Elias's room, where she discovers pieces of art that he had drawn for her, where she states that she never even knew he was an artist.
I didn't know he could draw. Didn't you?
Jen then announces that she too plans to leave soon, so her and Rosa have one final lunch together. Jen tries to encourage Rosa to move on with them, but Rosa refuses, and a thick fog begins to descend upon the house. Rosa begins to hallucinate before emerging from Cosmos' tent, only to find Jen and Cosmos sailing off into the distance, where they shout for her to join them.
Join us, Rosa!
I can't! I can't!
Rosa then pushes the lever Cosmos built for her, in which the house turns into a ship and breaks away from its foundations, where Rosa runs to the rooftop and sees her friends off in the distance. With the fog now clearing, she takes control of the house and sails off into the distance with her friends, where the short and the film ends and the credits roll. This third short definitely has the more unique feeling of the 3 shorts, less leaning on the dark and horror side and more on the spiritual and surrealist end, and is arguably the most light-hearted of the shorts, offering more comedic moments as the straight-laced Rosa interacts with the laid-back Cosmos.
What is money but some physical denomination of coin and note?
That's exactly what it is.
Similar to the theme of the first short, I believe this story represents the idea to forget about materialistic possessions, and instead focus on the things that truly matter, as well as leaning into the idea of taking chances in order to move on. Rosa is the only person in the house concerned with money, which is a little ironic because in her situation with the flood around her, there isn't really much need for it. She's so fixated on being able to renovate the home to attract new tenants, even though it's pointed out in the short that the reason the original tenants left was because of the rising floodwaters.
And if only I had tenants. Well, they all left. Yeah, I know they left. Because of the flooding.
So even if she did manage to redecorate, nothing would change. Her 2 remaining tenants are aware of this, and so instead of offering Rosa money that will serve little use to her, they instead offer things that will assist her in survival, like food and emotional support.
A reliever of emotional blockage and promoter of compassion to help you find your true sense of self.
But Rosa denies the need of these things, insisting all that she needs is the money. It kind of reminds me of the classic quote, "When the last tree has been cut down, the last fish caught, the last river poisoned, only then we will realise that we cannot eat money." One key moment is when she sees her two tenants watching TV enjoying themselves, and instead of joining them, she walks away, which is then later reflected in her hallucination as she sees herself alone and miserable. Other things hint at this, like how she never realised one of her friends was an artist, because she had been so transfixed on renovating the house, causing her to become isolated and distanced from them. I believe the environment we see around Rosa is more to represent her mindset, as she continues to ignore the inevitable growing problems around her, and how the dirty water and increasing fog represents her clouded thought process. But at the same time, she's too scared to abandon her setting and move on into a new chapter like her friends are. It's only at the end when she decides to leave and ends up pushing the lever that the fog begins to clear, symbolising that she's not only moving on physically, but also mentally. And similar to the second short, I believe the house here acts as more of a parallel to our character's mindset, struggling to remain intact, losing people around her, and becoming fogged up.
Where are you?
So those are the shorts individually, but what's my take on this as a single film? And do the shorts offer any real connection to one another? Well, first off, I think this would have worked better being presented as a series of 3 individual shorts, rather than having them sandwiched together as one film. My reason for this is that the pacing of it as a single film is kind of all over the place. The first short really handles it nicely with a satisfying conclusion, but the second short plays out at a much slower pace, which would be fine in on itself, but as a joint film it really grinds the pacing to a standstill. Not to mention the tone varies quite a bit with each short, offering a very inconsistent mood. Also, being a joint filmed, I assume that the 3 shorts would be linked much closer together in a narrative sense, and that events happening in one short would be significant for events that would occur in the next. But they aren't. Apart from taking place in the same house, I don't think these stories even exist in the same universe, as not only does the house location change, but so too do the species of the people occupying it. I did notice there was one connection in the second short where the young baby is referred to as Isabel, which I guess is a nod to the Isabel that we see in the first short, and maybe there are other Easter eggs like that which I've missed, but that's the issue. They're more or less just Easter eggs rather than critical plot points. The only real theme I could think of that carries over is that the house appears to be an extension of the people living in it. The ever-increasing materialism that ends up consuming the parents, the house's condition representing the developer's mental health, and the house's location representing Rosa's state of mind. Other than that, there's not really much. Even IMDb lists this as a TV series rather than a film. So I don't know if releasing it as a single film was the original creative decision, or if it was a later stage network decision. Either way, I don't think it was the right call. But on a more positive note, here are some things that were consistent throughout. The stop motion and cinematography are on point with every shot. The lighting, the camera movement, various camera angles, the design of the puppets, it's all incredibly well done. The voice acting is superb throughout. I especially love the voicing of Mr. Thomas, who's voiced by Mark Heap, as even though everything he says is incredibly polite, you just feel that sinister undertone.
So, when do you expect the work to begin?
Oh, I expect they've already started, sir. Mr. Van Schoenbeek doesn't like to dilly-dally.
And finally, the music is also on top form, ranging from the unsettling horror tones which give an eerie and uncomfortable feel, to the more hopeful score we get of Rosa as she climbs the house to set sail. In conclusion, I think from a technical aspect this film is great. and the stories told individually are great as well. Just not so much when they're presented back to back. I do recommend you checking out these shorts, especially the first one, but perhaps treat them as more 3 separate shorts rather than one solid film. And if you have watched them, do let me know what impressions you got from the shorts and what message you felt they were trying to convey. Also feel free to mention if I missed anything out. But until the next one, take care.